Imagine you're on an empty road, needing gas as darkness falls. The only station for miles flickers with dim lights, casting eerie shadows around the deserted lot. You pull up, but as you step out of the car, a chill runs down your spine. You feel as if someone or something is watching, but when you turn around, there's no one there. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into 5 of the creepiest gas station horror stories you'll ever hear. Whether it's strange figures lurking in the shadows or bizarre encounters that defy logic, these stories are guaranteed to make you think twice the next time you stop for gas at night. So, let's get right into it. Story 1. The Phantom Attendant. I had just clocked out from an exhausting double shift at the hospital. It was past midnight, and the streets of Fargo, North Dakota were eerily quiet. Driving home, I noticed my gas gauge dipping dangerously close to empty. I knew I had no choice but to stop. The only station nearby was one of those old-fashioned places, the kind you only see in old movies, flickering neon lights, peeling paint, and a faded sign barely hanging on to life. There was something unsettling about it, even from a distance. But at that hour, I couldn't be picky. When I pulled in, I noticed a man by the pumps. He wore a tattered green uniform, the kind gas station attendants wore decades ago, and an old cap pulled low over his face. He seemed almost out of place, like a living relic from a bygone era. I waved hesitantly as I got out, but he didn't respond. Instead, he just stared. No expression, no warmth, just a pair of lifeless eyes fixed on me. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and quickly filled up my tank. As I turned back to hand him some cash, he didn't reach for it, and instead he looked me dead in the eye and murmured, "You shouldn't be out here alone." The way he said it, it wasn't friendly or even protective. It was more like a warning, chillingly void of emotion. I felt a wave of goosebumps creep over my skin. "Yeah, thanks," I managed, trying to laugh it off. But when I took a step back, he didn't move. He just kept staring, those cold, empty eyes drilling into me. I hurriedly got back into my car, heart pounding as I sped off. As I reached the end of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him still standing there. But he was gone. The lot was empty. I didn't stop to wonder where he went. I just drove, needing to put distance between me and that place. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I told a friend what happened, and she laughed it off, saying the station was abandoned. When I drove back that afternoon to confirm it, my stomach dropped. She was right. The place was completely empty, boarded up and covered in dust as if it hadn't been touched in years. No signs of any recent activity, no signs of the man in the green uniform. It was as if he'd never been there. Later, a local told me the story of a young gas station attendant who had vanished from that station years ago under mysterious circumstances. Since then, strange sightings had been reported at odd hours. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't shake the feeling that I encountered his ghost that night, caught between worlds, bound to that lonely, forgotten gas station on the edge of town. Story 2. The Hitchhiker's Warning. I was driving back to Glasgow after a weekend visit to an old friend. The rain was coming down hard, pounding on the roof and creating a blurry curtain on my windshield. Visibility was so poor, I could barely make out the road in front of me. I was tense, gripping the wheel, feeling every little skid and slide. Then out of nowhere, I spotted a small, lonely gas station by the side of the road. The building looked worn, the lights flickering as if struggling to stay lit in the downpour. I figured I'd stop, fill up, and take a moment to gather myself before braving the rest of the journey. I pulled up to the pump, barely noticing the man standing a few meters away. He looked drenched to the bone, his clothes clinging to his body, hair plastered to his face. There was something off about him, but I shrugged it off, assuming he was just a local, possibly stranded in the storm. As I was filling up, he walked over to me, moving slowly, almost reluctantly, like he didn't want to come too close. He stopped a couple of feet away and, in a low voice that was almost a whisper, said, "Turn back. Don't go down that road tonight." I felt a chill run through me. His tone wasn't angry or aggressive. It was calm, like he was telling me a simple truth. I tried to ask him why, but he just shook his head, his eyes wide and fearful, like he knew something I didn't. "It's not safe for you," he repeated, his gaze fixed on mine. Feeling uneasy, I nodded and thanked him, more out of politeness than anything. But as I climbed back into my car, his words lingered. Against my better judgment, I continued down the road, thinking he was just being superstitious or messing with me. But as I rounded a bend not even a mile away, I saw something that made my heart stop. A car had veered off the road and smashed into a tree. The front end was crumpled, and there was smoke rising from the hood. I pulled over, intending to help, but as I approached the scene, I froze. Lying on the ground, only a few feet from the wreck, was the same man who had just warned me. His clothes were torn, blood trickling down his face. He looked up at me, the same fear in his eyes, as if he knew this was coming. I called for help, but by the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. They searched the area, but there was no trace of him, no sign that anyone had been there at all. To this day, I wonder if I saw his ghost, a soul trying to prevent others from meeting the same fate he did on the dark, rain-soaked road. Story 3: The Vanishing Clerk. The desert night was cool and quiet as I drove through Tucson on my way back to college. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, barren and still, except for a tiny gas station that appeared on the horizon like a mirage. The station was old and dimly lit, but I was nearly out of gas, so I pulled in, feeling a strange sense of relief to find even this lonely outpost in the middle of nowhere. As I stepped inside, a young man behind the counter looked up. He had dark circles under his eyes and a blank expression, as if he'd been there forever, staring at nothing. He barely glanced at me as I grabbed a bottle of water and went up to the register. His gaze seemed to drift past me, like he was lost in a world I couldn't see. After a moment of awkward silence, I handed him the cash, hoping to get out of there quickly. But as I turned to leave, he finally spoke. "Be careful on the road tonight," he murmured, almost too softly to hear. The way he said it felt like a warning, but it was so vague, so impersonal, that I brushed it off as something he probably said to everyone. Still, his words echoed in my mind as I got back in my car and drove off. I hadn't gone more than a mile when my car suddenly stalled, forcing me to pull over. As I looked around, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Somehow, impossibly, I was back at the same gas station, parked in the same spot, staring at the same flickering lights. Confused and rattled, I glanced around, but the lot was empty. The store lights were off, and the place looked as if it had been abandoned for years. I drove off, not stopping again until I reached a crowded truck stop miles away. When I later told my friends, they laughed, but a local told me that strange things happened on that stretch of road. Rumors of a clerk who disappeared years ago, his spirit supposedly lingering at the gas station, lost and bound to that lonely desert outpost forever. Story 4: The Shadow in the Rearview. I was on a long drive back from a weekend camping trip near Adelaide, Australia. It was the kind of remote road where you could go hours without seeing another car, just stretches of open landscape and winding bends. I was exhausted, but the thought of stopping in the middle of nowhere didn't appeal to me, at least not until I realized I was almost out of gas. I finally spotted an old, almost abandoned-looking gas station on the edge of the highway. Relieved, I pulled in, noticing immediately how quiet it was. Not a soul around, and the place looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Only one pump seemed to work, and even that one looked ancient, its numbers barely legible. As I began filling up, I glanced over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched, but no one was there. Just the silent, empty road stretching out behind me. I tried to shake off the feeling and hurried to finish, but something kept tugging at my attention. When I finally got back in the car and glanced at my rearview mirror, I froze. There in the back seat, I saw a shadowy figure, a dark outline, vaguely human, sitting perfectly still. My heart pounded as I whipped around to look, but the back seat was empty. I quickly turned to the mirror again, and this time there was nothing. Trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my own exhaustion, I started the engine and pulled out. But as I accelerated, I couldn't help glancing back at the mirror every few seconds. Just when I thought I'd imagined it all, the figure reappeared, even clearer than before. This time, it was leaning forward as if trying to peer over my shoulder. I could make out a face now, a face without any eyes, just hollow darkness where they should have been. I screamed and slammed on the brakes. The figure vanished instantly, but my heart kept racing. For the rest of the drive, I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. Even now, I avoid that stretch of road. Locals say it's haunted by the spirit of a hitchhiker who died in an accident years ago. But whether that's true or not, I know I'll never forget that shadow in my rearview mirror. Story 5. The Late Night Warning. Growing up in Galway, Ireland, I had heard my fair share of ghost stories, but I never took them seriously until one night when I was driving home from a late shift at work. It was around 2 a.m., and the roads were empty. My gas gauge was low, and I reluctantly pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't changed in decades, with faded signs and rusty pumps that creaked as they moved. As I started filling up, I noticed a woman standing by the edge of the lot. She was dressed in an old-fashioned coat and scarf, her face partially hidden in the shadows. I wasn't sure why, but something about her presence sent a chill down my spine. She just stood there, not moving, watching me with an intensity that was unsettling. Trying to ignore her, I finished filling up, but as I was about to leave, she approached me, her footsteps slow and deliberate. "You should be careful on the roads tonight," she said, her voice low and almost melodic, yet filled with a strange, unsettling urgency. I tried to smile politely. "Thanks, I will," I replied, eager to get back into my car. But she didn't move. Instead, she looked at me with this haunting sadness in her eyes, almost as if she was trying to tell me something more. Finally, I got back in the car and drove off, glancing in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. The woman was gone, the lot empty. I felt a strange sense of relief, but it didn't last long. Not even 10 minutes later, as I was rounding a sharp bend, I saw a massive truck barreling toward me, half over in my lane. I swerved just in time, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. Shaken, I pulled over to catch my breath, realizing just how close I'd come to disaster. The woman's warning echoed in my mind. Had she known? Or was it just a bizarre coincidence? When I later mentioned the incident to a friend, he grew pale and told me about an old legend of a woman who had died in a car accident on that very road years ago. Locals believe her spirit lingers there, warning drivers on dangerous nights. I'd always thought ghost stories were just that, stories, but now I'm not so sure. That night changed everything for me, and I still wonder if that mysterious woman saved my life. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.